today we're going to look at doing midpoint without just looking at the graph. And it is really important to know how to do both of these without a graph, but especially this because as you saw in the homework that we had a couple nights ago, sometimes you get points that are like in between and you can't really figure out where exactly you should go. So if we're looking at the distance between x1, y1 and x2, y2, so if we just kind of graph, 2 points, you could put them anywhere. So midpoint of this might be about right there, maybe. I'm not even sure. Close to that. It's up to you. So whenever I'm looking at the midpoint here, I'm thinking in terms of our x direction and our y direction. So in the x direction, I need this distance right here to equal this distance. I need the x's, I need that to be like the average of the x's. And I need, vertically, I need this distance to equal that bottom distance. So it's got to be halfway between the x's. It also has to be halfway between the y's. So I think this formula is one of the easiest ones to remember as long as you know how to take an average. So Cole, what do we do if we need to take an average? Right, add together and divide by how many you have, right? So if I wanted to know the average shoe size in this class, I'd add everybody's shoe size together. I'd divide by, I think there's 20 of you today. I'd divide by how many I have. So whenever you think midpoint, the average gives you the middle number. So you're really just finding the average of your x's and the average of your y's. So your midpoint formula is this. X1 plus x2 divided by 2. And that's just the average of your x's. You add them together, divide by how many there are. Add them together, divide by 2. And then the y coordinate, you'll have a comma here. The y coordinates, you'll add those together. Y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So that is your midpoint formula. I really don't think of it as much like a formula. I think of it more like just finding the average. So let's do some examples. Oh wait, wrong one. There we go. I'll let you copy these down. So when we're finding midpoint, we are going to find the average. So we are going to add our x's together. So our x's are right here. So we'll have 32 plus negative 28, and then we'll divide it by 2. And then our y's are right here. So we'll have 144 plus 11 divided by 2. Okay. So for our x's, we're going to add those together. 32 plus negative 28 is just going to give us 4 divided by 2. And then 144 plus 11 is going to give us 155 divided by 2. And so 4 divided by 2 is pretty easy. That is 2. 155 divided by 2, 77.5. So this is our answer right here, 277.5. Okay. Now, let me give you a word of caution on this. The answer to a midpoint problem is a point. It's coordinates. You don't add those numbers together. You don't. Whenever you get the answer for a midpoint, you need to be able to graph that point on a graph. So obviously we're not going to graph this because it's 277.5 and it's not going to fit on a graph for us. But if we had a big enough graph, we could plot those points. 277.5, we could graph it. Okay? Because the answer to a midpoint question is a point. The answer to a distance question is a single number because it's a distance. I can't tell you how many times I grade quizzes and tests, and students have answered a question like find the midpoint of 32, 144, and negative 28, 11, and they have answered it with 28.4. Okay? That's not a midpoint. You can't graph it. Right? They have found distance instead. I can't tell you how many distance problems that I've given, and students give the answer of negative 7.2. Alright, so if it's a distance problem, you should just have one number as your answer because that's the distance. If it is a midpoint problem, you should have a point.
Oh, I have that.
Okay, good. Good. Right, so don't add. Don't add on those. Okay, because you want a coordinate. So what it is it's like if I asked you how far it is from here to Walmart, it would be like if you answered that question saying food line. You would seem like an idiot, right? If I said, Tristan, how far is it from Elkin High School to Walmart? And you said food line. You're not telling me how far it is. You're telling me what's halfway between Elkin High School and Walmart, right? So you're not answering the right question. Or if I asked you, Tristan, what is the point halfway between Elkin and or Elkin High School and Walmart? And you told me, if I said, what's the halfway point? And you told me 4.7 miles. That would make maybe a little more sense if you were telling me how far it was to the halfway point, but still we're looking for the place, right? Not the distance. So make sure if you have a midpoint problem, your answer is a point. If you have a distance problem, if it asks what is the distance, how far, something like that, you've got a distance problem, you should be answering with just one single number for the distance. Okay? All right. So, a problem like number 4. We learned how to do this by graphing, by just plotting our points and kind of figuring out where this was. But for this one, I do not want to try to graph 25, negative 4, and negative 44, 22. So, I'm going to show you a couple ways you can do this problem. First of all, Z is the midpoint of XY. So, I'm going to draw myself a line here. And XY are the X and Y are the endpoints of the graph, of the line segment. Z is the midpoint here. Okay? And then X is located at 25, negative 4. 25, negative 4. And Z is at negative 44, 22. Okay? And so the biggest mistake students make on this is they find the midpoint. But if I use midpoint formula for these 2 points, I haven't found Y. I've found this point right here halfway between X and Z, and that is not what they asked me for. So, whenever we had this on the graph, what we did is we graphed the points. So, like, I'm going to do a really rough sketch of this graph because I can't really graph it. So, I've got 25, negative 4. That'd be like right here. That's my X. And Z would be at negative 44, 22. We'll put that like right here. There's my Z. So, Y, I know is going to be over here somewhere. So, on the graph, what we did is we just kind of counted up, however many, and over however many, and then we just did that again. Right? So that's what you're going to do with this. To see how far you've got to go over, if I go from 25 to negative 44, I had to subtract something there, right? To go from 25 to negative 44, what number do I have to subtract? It's going to be a lot. So 25 minus what would you? 69. So subtract 69. So if I want to get to the x over here, I've got to subtract 69 again. So I would do negative 44 minus 69, and that would give me negative 113. No, you're taking, so to get from 25 to negative 44, I had to subtract 69. So to get to the next point, I've got to take where I'm at, which is negative 44, and I've got to subtract 69 again. So what I did to get this negative 113 is I did negative 44, which is where I was at. That was my midpoint, and I subtracted 69, and that gave me the 113. Okay, there, if you're not sure how to get that negative 69, if you do 25 minus negative 44, if you just subtract the two numbers, the difference between them is 69, so you can tell how much. And I know I subtracted because I went down from 25 to negative 44. Okay, so for negative 4 to 22, am I adding or subtracting a number there? I'm going to be adding. So, what number am I adding to get from negative 4 to 22? Not 18. Because negative 4 plus 18 would give me 14. If it was positive 4, you'd be right about that 18, but it's a negative. Okay? So, it's 26 that we're adding. You can always, this will always work. If you need to know that difference between the two, you could do negative 4 minus 22, and that'll give you negative 26, and then figure out which sign it should be. It's not negative, obviously, here. So you could just subtract them and see the difference. So if we're going to go from here over to here, we could add 26, and so 22 plus 26 is going to give us 48. So, 48. So, our answer here is that y would be at negative 113, 48. Questions? Okay, let me show you another way in case you do not like that way. Even though I might have to. We'll run out. Well, I'm going to put it up here. So, section this part off. So, the other way that you could do it is if you got that same line, you got X, you've got Y, and you got Z, and you know that you got 25, negative 4. You've got negative 44, 22. And then I don't know what this is, so I'm just going to call it X and Y. So you could use the formula. So if you are finding midpoint, you would add the endpoints together, 25 plus X, and you would divide it by 2. And so whenever you do that, it should give you the X coordinate for your Z. your midpoint. So you should get negative 44. Okay? So I'm using my formula here, 25 plus x divided by 2, that's my midpoint formula. It needs to equal that negative 44. Cole, how do I solve that equation? No, it's already divided by 2 right now. What's the opposite of dividing by 2? We'll multiply both sides by 2. So that's going to give us 25 plus x equals negative 88. And then we could subtract 25. And whenever we do that, we'll get negative 113 for that. So that's your x coordinate. And then you could do the same thing for the y. So for the y, we would have negative 4 plus y divided by 2 is going to equal the y coordinate here, which is 22. So, Jesus, how would we solve that one? Trying to get that y by itself, we got to get rid of the negative 4 and the 2. Okay, this 2 right here, it looks like a fraction, but it's not really. It's really division, right? Divide by 2. What's the opposite of dividing by 2? Multiplying. So we'll multiply both sides by 2, which will cancel over here. Multiply by 2, so we'll get negative 4, excuse me, plus y equals 44. Okay? And then what's the last thing we would do to solve that? Okay, so you got negative 4 plus y equals 44. So you'll add that 4. Okay, so y equals 48. I'll put those on different slides next time so I can write a little bigger. And so negative 1348, that's our answer there. So if you get a little confused, I always do this, I think it's faster, but if you get a little confused by that, you could use the formula for those. All right, we got one more question that we're going to do. Okay? All right, for the sake of time, don't write all of this down. Just write down what I'm going to highlight here. King, halfway between Mount Airy and High Point. Pilot Mountain, halfway between King and Mount Airy. And then you can just write Mount Airy is at this point, High Point is here. And then here we're just looking for the coordinates of Pilot Mountain, and here we're just looking for the distance, High Point to Pilot Mountain. That was yellow. I'm going to draw my picture on this graph right here because we're looking at an actual map. You guys may just want to draw a line and we'll see we've got Mount Airy here. We've got High Point here. We've got King. To make this work, I'm going to put King slightly below where King actually is. These were estimates. And then we've got Pilot Mountain. Okay. Lee and Elkin are right over here, but Elkin wasn't in a nice line with the rest of everything else. So, but these are in a fairly straight line to each other, and it is. When I was looking at the map for places where this might be pretty close to being true. King is pretty close to being halfway between Mount Airy and High Point, and Pilot Mountain is about halfway between Mount Airy and King. So we are given coordinates for Mount Airy. Mount Airy is at negative 54, positive 72. And High Point is at 10, negative 18. So A asked me for the coordinates of Pilot Mountain. Am I going to be able to find that right away? Okay. So what would I have to find first, Aiden? I got to find where King's at. And so King is the midpoint. So I can just do midpoint formula. So Aiden, tell me what to do to find that midpoint formula. Good. Negative 54 plus 10 . Okay, good. Divide both of those by 2. We'll put some parentheses around it. I am going to count off if you write coordinates and you don't put parentheses around them. You've got to have parentheses around them. Because I don't know what 3, 7 is. I don't know if you meant you got one answer is 3, 1, and 7. Sometimes that looks like 3.7. But all coordinates always have parentheses around them. So make sure you put parentheses around them. Okay. Okay, that looks good. So I can do it step by step. I think we can just use the calculator. So negative 54 plus 10 is going to be negative 44, and then negative 44 divided by 2 is going to give us negative 22. And then over here, 72 plus negative 18, that's really like 72 minus 18. So that is going to give you 54. Is that right? Yep, 54. And then 54 divided by 2 is 27. Whenever you type this into the calculator, I should probably stop and show you this, because this will make a big difference. When you type this into the calculator, so when you type in negative 54 plus 10 divided by 2, you cannot type it in like this just did right here. So some of you typed that in on your own and you got negative 49. Anytime you're typing something into the calculator, if you've got more than one thing in the numerator, you've got to put parentheses around it. Or you could hit enter before you go to the next part. So you could do negative 54 plus 10, enter, and then divide by 2. That'll give you negative 22. Or you can do negative 54 plus 10, and then divide by 2, the parentheses, and it will also give you the right answer. So be careful when you type that into your calculator. Okay, questions? All right, is this our answer?
No.
That's king. So now I got to use what I just found here, and I got to find the midpoint between Mount Airy and King. So I'm going to have to do this again. So, for this one, let's see, Madison, what would I do to find the midpoint between Mount Airy and King? What? So Pilot Mountain is halfway between Mount Airy and King, right? So we're just finding the midpoint. We've just got to find the midpoint between these two coordinates. So to find the midpoint, it's an average. We add together, divide by 2. So for the x coordinate, what would we have, Madison? Negative 54 plus negative 22, and that'll be divided by 2. And then for the y coordinate, what will we have? Good. And that will be divided by 2. Okay, everybody do that on your calculator. I want you all doing it on your calculator. Make sure you are typing it incorrectly. See what answer you get. Everybody typing it in on your calculator. Okay, good. Sorry, I apologize. I have not done it myself. Okay. Alright. Julie told me the first one is negative 38. That is correct. And 49.5. Okay. So you should get negative 38, 49.5. That is your answer. Those are the coordinates of Pilot Mountain. Yes. Okay. What did you get? So what did you have set up? Mm-hmm. You have High Point and King? Yes. So what you found is you found probably about Winston-Salem. So because Pilot Mountain's halfway between Mount Airy and King, you have to use that point for Mount Airy there. So for your x coordinates, you'll have to have negative 54 plus negative 22, and then you'll divide that by 2 to take the average, and then you'll have 72 plus 27 divided by 2. So you got to use the coordinates from Mount Airy. If it only asks for distance, you could probably get away with it because the distance from like Winston to High Point would be about the same as the distance from Mount Airy to Pilot Mountain. But because it wants the coordinates, you have to make sure you're using the right endpoint there. So it matters which one you use. Okay. Other questions? Yes. Yes. Okay. Now we need to know the distance from High Point to Pilot Mountain. So distance, this is distance formula, or subtract your x's, subtract your y's, take the square root. So Hayden, help me out with this one. Which way do you want to solve? Do you want to use distance formula, or subtract x's, subtract y's to do Pythagorean theorem? Distance formula is that big d equals square root of x2. No, not that one. Okay. All right. So you want to subtract x's, subtract y's here. So we're looking at the distance between Pilot Mountain, which I'm gonna label here. That was negative 3849.5. So we're looking at the distance between this point and High Point, which is here. Pilot Mountain to High Point. All right, so first thing we have to do is subtract our x's. So what would we subtract there, Hayden? Okay, so negative 38 minus 10, that's going to give me negative 48. Okay, what about for the y's, Hayden? Good, so 49.5. And be really careful here because you're doing minus negative 18. So make sure you do that correctly. So really that's going to be like a plus right there. So pull out the calculator for that one. 49.5 plus 18 is going to give us 67.5. So Hayden, once we get those x's and y's, what we've really done there, it's like we made ourselves a right triangle. And the x's, we subtract those, it's like we got a length of 48 right here. It's like we got 67.5 right here. All right. So once we get those, what do we do with those two numbers? Okay, if I have a right triangle like this and I want to find that missing side, what do I use? What is it, Olivia? Well, we're looking for the hypotenuse, but what formula do we use to find that? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. We use that Pythagorean theorem, okay? All right, so when we plug this into Pythagorean theorem, we'll have negative 48 squared plus 67.5 squared equals c squared. And let's just reach for our calculator on that. So you can type the whole thing in at once as long as you do your parentheses right. Negative 48 squared plus 67.5 squared. It's going to give us 6,860.25. So, put this up here. C squared equals 6,860.25, right? And so what's the last thing that you do for that, Hayden? Square root. So we square root both sides there, and whenever we do that, square root the answer, we'll get 82.827. 82.827. They didn't give us units on this. That's not miles because that's shorter distance than that. I don't know. I just was making up a problem. So Alright, questions? Stop, Pam. Stop. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So, it is almost time to go. So, right now, what I need you to do is I need you to do number 21. Yep, on that worksheet that you have. And you got to show me what you got before you you got to show me what you got before you go. You can use the graph on that one if you want. However you want. Okay, you can graph it if you would like.